Video where I'm going to go over the questions and answers for everything from Test 1 from the ES1 unit, Scientific Investigation. So the first question on the test was, in an experiment, this is the response variable. The options were independent variable, dependent variable, the control group, and the manipulated variable. And the answer was the dependent variable. In an experiment, you are seeing if the dependent variable responds to the independent variable. The independent variable is the manipulated variable. The dependent variable is the response variable. The second question showed you an image of a graduated cylinder, and you had to read it and tell me how much fluid was inside. And the answer was 84 milliliters, and most people got that right. With those graduated cylinders, you just have to be sure to read the bottom of the curve or the bottom of the meniscus. Next question, which of the following is not a step in the scientific method? This is according to my notes. And in my notes, I have communicate results at the end. Validation is not a part of the scientific method. Draw a conclusion is a part, and collect data is a part. For this question, you had to convert 8,830 into scientific notation, and the answer was 8.83 times 10 to the third. So your decimal point begins over here after the 0, and you have to move it to the left 3 times to make the number between 1 and 10. 8.83 is between 1 and 10. And you had to move the decimal point 3 places to get it there. Next question, if the mass of a liquid is 40 grams and the volume is 20 milliliters, what is the density? So density equals mass divided by volume. So the mass is 40 grams and the volume is 20 milliliters. To get this answer, all you had to do was divide 40 by 20, and you get 2 grams per milliliter. The next question showed a graph and just asked you to read it and asked you which month had the fewest number of birthdays, and the answer was August. Next question. The title of my experiment is The Effect of Different Colored Lights on Plant Growth. Which of the following would be a constant in the experiment? So the correct answer was the amount of water per day. An experiment like this would have many constants. You would be using the same type of plant. You would have them get the same amount of sunlight. You would have, or the same amount of light, the same amount of soil, the same size pot. Several people suggested the plants that get only sunlight, that would be your control. So if you're changing the color of light, the group under natural conditions, or the no treatment group, would be plants getting only sunlight, and then the colored lights would be your experimental groups. And the color of the light would be the independent variable. But in this experiment, there's lots of things you need to hold constant. You have to give them all the same amount of water, for example. Next question, identify which of the following observations are quantitative. And you could mark more than one answer. There were 2 right answers for this. There was a picture of 8 stuffed bears, and each bear had 2 eyes. So quantitative means quantities or numbers. So you had to mark both answers with numbers to get full credit for this question. I actually gave you half credit if you only marked one of the answers, one of the correct answers. But to get full credit, you had to mark both of the correct answers. There are 8 stuffed bears, and each bear has 2 eyes. Those are the quantitative observations. The other 2 observations are qualitative. For this question, you had to convert 1,000 meters, and it is equal to 1 kilometer. There are 1,000 meters in every kilometer. You could use King Henry doesn't usually drink chocolate milk to figure this out. Moving the decimal point 3 places to the left would get you 1.0. So meters are a base unit. Kilo means 1,000 base units. Which of the following would be the best metric unit for measuring the mass of a leaf? Well, it would be something grams, because mass is measured in grams, so you can eliminate millimeters as an answer. Milligrams is the correct answer. A leaf doesn't have very much mass, so you would want a small unit to measure the mass of the leaf. Kilograms are too big and hectograms are too big. You would want milligrams in this case. Next question. Ellis is conducting an experiment to see which oven temperature bakes the fastest cake. What is the dependent variable? So I actually asked this question on the quiz and asked you for the independent variable, which was oven temperature. But he's changing the oven temperature to see which temperature bakes the fastest cake. So time of baking would be the dependent variable. Cake ingredients, that would be a constant. Time of day, that ought to also be a constant. All right, what type of graph is this? It was a scatter plot, and 100% of you got that right. What does the above lab safety symbol mean? It was the symbol for biohazard. How many centiliters are in a liter? Centi is a small unit. There are 100 centiliters inside one base unit, which is a liter. So centi is like a century. There's 100 years in a century, or cents, 100 cents in a dollar. Centiliters, there are 100 in the base unit of liter. Which tool would you use to measure volume? Triple beam balance measures mass, as does a digital scale. A thermometer measures temperature. The correct tool to measure volume is a graduated cylinder. Next question. Alan conducts an experiment to see if different brands of shoes make him run faster. He runs the length of the gym 5 times wearing different brands of shoes. He finds that he runs fastest in Converse. What could he do to make his results more reliable? So, repeated trials are what offer more reliability, more validation to your results. You can know with repeated trials that it wasn't just a coincidence that it happened that way. You did it, if you do it multiple times and you get the same results, that means your results are reliable. But if you're changing the distance and using 5 different brands of shoes, that would be changing the experiment. You want to keep the experiment the same and run it again. So repeating the experiment exactly the same way several times, that was the correct answer to make the results more reliable. Next question. A student finds 2 rocks of roughly equal size in the school parking lot. She brings them into the lab and puts them both in a beaker of water. Rock A sinks and rock B floats. Which of the following statements are most likely true? You can mark more than one. So in water, if something floats, especially a rock, generally its density is going to be less than that of water. A rock that's floating would have a density that's lower than 1 gram per milliliter. A rock that's sinking would have a density that's greater than 1 gram per milliliter, because 1 gram per milliliter is the density of water. And it's important here that you notice the rocks are roughly of equal size, so we can assume that they have close to equal volume. So if 2 rocks of the same volume have different masses, the one with more mass will have a greater density as well. So there were 2 correct answers. Rock A has a greater mass than rock B, and rock A is more dense than rock B. Those were both correct answers. I gave half credit for marking one of the correct answers, but you had to have both correct answers for full credit. What would be an appropriate research question for the above experiment? So there was a graph, and the correct answer was, what is the effect of fertilizer on plant height? Because fertilizer was on the x-axis, it is the independent variable. Plant height was on the y-axis, that is the dependent variable. And the research question should be the effect of IV on dV. That's what an experiment is. You're seeing if changing the independent variable intentionally has an effect on the dependent variable. You wouldn't change plant height to see if it affected the amount of fertilizer. It has to be the other way around. All right, which group in the experiment is the standard for comparison? That is the control group, the group under natural conditions, the no treatment group. Convert 1.3 hectograms to decagrams. So this is a King Henry doesn't usually drink chocolate milk problem. Hecto is the H, and deca is the first D. So you're only moving the decimal point one place from H to D, and you get 13 decagrams. What should you do when there's broken glass in the science lab? 100% of you got this right. Notify the instructor. Which statement is true based on the above graph? I don't have the graph here, but the correct answer was humans are slower than the other animals contained in the graph. Which mathematical technique allows you to show very large or very small numbers in the smaller space, and that is scientific notation. So that was all of the questions on the first test. If you have any questions, feel free to ask in class.